Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. In this first hour, we're going to spend some time talking about childhood sexual abuse, sexual predators, and, of course, a parental advisory. You can imagine what we're talking about today. We'll be careful, but obviously, if young ears are there, you may want to move them into the next room. If you are out on Twitter, perhaps you have seen this hashtag. Hashtag, how old were you? And we're going to talk about that today as we have a chance to talk with an individual that helped begin it, and also spend some time talking with an individual that has been on our program many times before, Mary DeMuth. But let me first of all introduce Karen Swallow Pryor. Dr. Pryor is a professor of English at Liberty University, earned her PhD and master's degree from State University of New York, and has developed all sorts of scholarly work. We have a very long list of that, but in the interest of time, I'll allow you to read that. It is on our website, pointofview.net, under Today on Point of View. And Dr. Pryor, I appreciate you joining us today here on Point of View.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I might also bring back to the microphone a good friend who's been on the program many times with us before, Mary DeMuth, who's also written on a variety of different issues, but one of those has been the issue of sexual abuse, and we have talked about that as we've talked about Not Marked and Thin Places and Other. And Mary, thank you for joining us as well.
Great to be here. Thanks, Kerby.
All right. Well, Dr. Pryor, I guess we start off with this. I read about this and wanted to certainly focus on it, if for no other reason than to alert even more individuals about this issue of sexual predation and sexual abuse. It is something which you've talked about before the church does not address. I hope we're the exception here on Point of View, because we've done quite a few shows on the topic. But you did this in large part to ask the question, how old were you? Fill in the blank, if you might.
Yes, and I'm sure, please call me Karen.
Okay.
And I know that Mary responded to the same article in a Christian publication that expressed the story, the so-called testimony of a child sex predator. And there was, rightfully so, a great bit of outrage about the article. But I understood the editor's intent, and I thought that there was some value in the story. However, the story of this youth pastor who had seduced and raped apparently one of his youth members. It struck me that the shock of the editors and the readers betrayed an innocence about how often this kind of thing goes on. And
Yes.
So it just occurred to me to throw the question out there, not so much a matter of if, but when. How old were you when you were pursued by an adult authority sexually? And I feared, but believed that there would be a lot of answers to that question, and there were. The hashtag took off.
Matter of fact, one of the posts that you have put up recently, 9, 14, 6, 17, 11, 4, 8, 2, you said the numbers took over my Twitter feed, and I wished, how I wish that these were just numbers, but they weren't numbers, were they?
No.
We actually do name names, and so I guess for anybody that's not familiar, this appeared in Leadership Journal. I feel like any topic is on the table, and certainly anybody that has written in a particular publication deserves to be mentioned. So that certainly started the hashtag, and we're going to talk about that and sexual abuse and all the rest. But come back to this issue for just a minute before I go to Mary DeMuth, because we certainly appreciate her perspective on this as well. And that is, You're an English professor, Liberty University. In some respects, a lot of people would say, maybe that's a sociology professor's interest, or maybe that is somebody who's in the parachurch ministry. But here, as a professor at Liberty, you still felt that it might be a way to begin to educate the church using Twitter feeds.
Sure, exactly. And I wasn't writing an article for a peer-reviewed scholarly journal. I wrote an article for a great website called Christ in Pop Culture that reaches young adults and older people about current issues and models how Christians should engage the culture. And I serve students who are affected by these kinds of things, as I myself was, very mildly, but still. And so not from a scholarly perspective, but certainly from an engaging the culture and living in the real world, dealing with these issues perspective, I felt like I could address the issue. I really didn't know that it would tap into something so strongly, and I'm just glad that I was able to take the moment and make something of it. And I know Mary wrote about it very effectively as well.
She certainly did. And Mary, I want to come to you. Let me also mention that we've had you on a number of times before talking about different things. Your most recent book, Not Marked, Finding Hope and Healing After Sexual Abuse, Thin Places, The Wall Around Your Heart. You have certainly addressed many topics. I think the first time you and I met in studio was we were talking about postmodernism. We've talked about other issues, but certainly you are known for an individual that has been very vulnerable in your own experience and a little bit, if I can say, rightly critical of the way in which the secular and sometimes Christian media have covered the issue.
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it because I feel like it's a big hole in the church. There's a broken part there where we tend to favor, you even see it in the news right now, where we favor the perpetrator over the victim, and I just think it's wrong. And as a victim myself, and as one who doesn't care anymore about talking about it and is not afraid, I feel like part of my mission on this earth is just to be bold and strong and stand up for those who haven't found their voice yet about it, who have been afraid to speak up about the abuse that happens. And just seeing some churches do really well with this, and so many others do very poorly with how do you handle this very touchy issue, particularly when it happens within the church, which is what the initial post was about. It was about a youth pastor who classified his relationship with a teen half his age as a relationship, and it was just so outrageously wrong that many people, including so many others, have took up the cause, and we were able to get that post taken down. But I'm just so grateful to be a part of it.
I wanted to mention that because there was a hashtag take down that post, and you felt that it was important. We all believe in the freedom of speech and freedom of press, but there comes a point in time where if indeed there looks like an imprimatur from a Christian organization towards something, you actually felt that it was important enough to take that post down and to maybe cleanse it of some of the things that were being said.
Yeah, it just gave a platform to, and I think Karen would probably agree that it's good to have, honesty and integrity in journalism and freedom of the press. Absolutely, I applaud that. But it gave a platform for a pedophile to help others feel sorry for him and to kind of justify his sin without any remorse toward the victims, very little remorse, if any. And so in that sense, that's why the take down that post hashtag continued until it was taken down.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to get into this in a little more detail because, as you will see, we've posted a couple of articles here today. One in particular, the origins of a heartbreaking hashtag, How Old Were You? And matter of fact, if you haven't visited that, you can go to Twitter and then type in hashtag How Old Were You? You can follow along, see some of the posts that were there, maybe add yours if that's a testimony that you have. But also want to get into some of the reaction that has surfaced. Dear Man in Prison, that was one by Mary, and certainly one to publish a Predator and a couple of others. There are certainly a lot of other issues to this story. We'll continue our conversation about that with our two guests right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the Supreme Court ruling in the Hobby Lobby case continues to be controversial to some, as evidenced by the attempt in the U.S. Senate to overturn the ruling through legislation. Critics say that your employer should not determine which birth control you use, and supporters say that employers shouldn't have to pay for birth control that violates their religious convictions. I would essentially agree with both statements and argue that is why we should get government and employers out of medical decisions you should be able to make without their interference. Dr. Ben Carson makes that point in a recent column talking about health savings accounts. He also acknowledges that people have legitimate differences of opinion about the appropriateness of various forms of birth control. He also agrees that we shouldn't force people or businesses to fund controversial forms of birth control if they have moral objections. He therefore asks, wouldn't it be fairer and make more sense for people wanting some form of birth control to pay for it themselves? Health savings accounts can be funded in a number of ways. This would give each of us total control of our health care dollars. We can determine how we want to spend our money on which drugs and medical procedures. Dr. Carson also explains that family members could also shift money in their account to another family member who may need a particular test or procedure. Dr. Carson laments the complex rules of Obamacare that severely restrict the use and application of health savings accounts. This is indeed unfortunate because these accounts would answer the two complaints I mentioned earlier. You, and not your employer, should determine which birth control you would use, and employers would not have to pay for birth control that violates their religious convictions. Health savings accounts would be simple, effective, and allow for greater patient freedom without violating their religious freedom. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today about childhood sexual abuse and sexual predators. And if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. If you want to share your story, you're free to do so. And, of course, we'll also provide an opportunity for you to remain anonymous if you feel that that would be appropriate. A number of guests that we have by phone with us, Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor, Professor of English at Liberty University. Might also mention that she has won such awards as Faculty of the Year, Sigma Tau Delta Teacher of the Year, and a recipient of the President's Award for Teaching Excellence, author of a number of books. And Mary DeMuth, who's been with us many times before, an author, speaker, author of at least 15 different books, some of which have related to this very topic that we're talking about today of sexual abuse. Karen, let me come to you for just a minute. As a professor, you all probably never really want to take down a post or censor anything, but it does seem to me that what showed up there in Leadership Journal needed to be taken down because it seemed to be providing aid and comfort to an action that did not deserve it. And more importantly, the reaction to some of the people might have illustrated why we need to do more education. Your thoughts?
Well, you've honed it right in on my my position. I that is one reason why I started the other hashtag. I'm very hesitant to take anything down or censor anything, and so that's why I thought, well, this is an opportunity, is a teachable moment, so I'm going to put out this other hashtag and see what happens. It would have been a wonderful story for someone else to write, interviewing this person and setting his ideas in a proper contextual framework, but as you and Mary have already pointed out, unfortunately, it just came across as though the Leadership Journal was supporting that position, and that's really what had to change. Even the editorial comment that they added at the end just was too weak to repair the damage. So,
Yes.
but it did provide a teachable moment. And so ultimately, the fact that it was out there, I hope, is doing some good because of things like this show and the post that I wrote and the post that Mary wrote and the greater awareness that people now have about what a widespread problem this is.
Well, people in 43 different states that listen to this program are listening to it right now, so it's giving it quite a bit of exposure, and I think it deserves such. Mary, let me come to you for just a minute, because we were talking about the church. You know, I know that you were looking for a publisher for your book, Not Marked, and you would think that given the kind of conflicts that we have right now, the turmoil, all the evidence about sexual predators, the concern about sexual abuse, that you would easily and readily find a publisher that say, yeah, that's a book we need to put into print. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so I'm traditionally published many times, and so I just assumed wrongly that when I pitched this book, it would be well received, and most of the publishers that were approached were just freaked by it and said there's no market for it. And I had to kind of laugh to myself. I tried not to laugh, in the middle of it, but I know there's a huge market, but it is a very scary topic, and it's now finally getting to the place where we're actually speaking about these things. They've been shoved underneath the carpet for a very long time, and it's hard to find pieces of literature, whether in book form or in blog form, where people honestly say what happened and how these things can be talked about and prevented.
Well, and I think your concern was, as you pointed out, that they said there's no market for it. We use the statistic, and it may be inaccurate, but it's at least the right order of magnitude, that at least, isn't it fair to say, 1/4 of all women we would come into contact with have had some kind of abuse that I think could certainly fit into this category?
Yeah, I think that's super conservative, but yes, I think across the board the statistics have proven to be about that, but I think it's higher.
Yeah, well, I think so too. So we're talking about in almost 100 million people. I mean, that sounds like a very large book market if individuals want to deal with it. And one other point, and I'll come back to Karen, it seems to me that some women don't even realize they've been abused. They blame themselves, or they can't bring themselves to recognize that they would benefit from your book or other things that have been written, because they're either in denial or they didn't even understand what the nature of abuse might be.
Yeah, I think that's where Dan Allender's The Wounded Heart comes into play, because he talks there about any sort of unwanted sexual touch is considered abuse. And honestly, healing from those things, they did the study, and it said it didn't really matter the degree of the sexual abuse, whether it involved talking or touching or something much more severe. The recovery from each incident was almost exactly the same. It did not depend on the severity of the abuse. And so, yeah, I think a lot of us will hear about these terrible stories, and we'll say, and I've done this before, oh, well, yeah, my story isn't that bad, so it really couldn't have been sexual abuse compared to that person's story.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because I know there are listeners right now that are saying, maybe this fits into the category of sexual abuse. Never really thought about that, or didn't really want to think about it, but you're now bringing it to the fore for the first time. Karen, you're at probably one of the premier Christian colleges in the country, and I would love to know if there are discussions like that on campus that you're aware of, or again, back to maybe your concern that the church has not addressed this well. What have you found, especially now that you've done this hashtag, in terms of the response and maybe the sensitivity that hopefully we're gaining in the body of Christ about this issue?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to our university is quite large, and I can't speak to the kinds of things that they might be doing in the student care office and so forth. I just know in my own classroom, I teach English literature, which sounds far removed from this, but in literature, we talk about everything. And so I use the literature that we read about as teaching moments to talk about real things that students might be dealing with. And so as a result, I've had a lot of students come to me and share stories of abuse, of rape, and it just, the fact that these things happened often in the church and these students have not been able to talk about it, it has just kept me informed in a powerful way about how real this problem is. and how much need there is for the church to address it.
One of the things you talk about in your article, and I wanted to come to this as well, as you said, I cannot even begin to count the friends and relatives who were pursued as minors, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, by adult predators. A friend pursued by our high school swimming coach, and you go through a very long list, and others. And I thought that was important, back to the comment we made a minute ago with Mary, because you have some individual that actually were abused but don't realize it and never really thought that through. Then you have others that were never abused but were targeted. And you talk about that as another sort of unspoken issue and something that the church has not addressed as well.
Right. And, of course, that was my own situation. I was a junior in high school when my health teacher started feeling me in class and whispering in my ear. And when I was 16 or 17, I just laughed it off because I thought of myself as an adult. I thought of him as what we used to call a dirty old man.
Yes.
And these kinds of stories I swapped endlessly with my schoolmates and friends and relatives. And so my shock comes with other people's shock if these things don't happen. Now, as an adult, of course, and an educator, I look at this situation much differently, and it's much more common than not. So I agree with Mary that these numbers, depending on how you define abuse, certainly being the target of predatory behavior, must happen to almost everyone.
Mary, just before we take a break, let me come back to you, because you mentioned this in some of your books, but I like to put it on the table again. As a parent, you're a parent, I'm a parent, we certainly recognize that there are other adults that come into our children's lives, whether we're talking about teachers, as we were talking about with Karen, coaches, for those of us who are in sports and things of that nature. And it does seem to me, and it's sad to say, we can't kind of chalk all that up to the dirty old men. I mean, parents today have to be much more alert to the fact that this Cub Scout leader, Boy Scout leader, this coach, this swim team associate seems to be paying a little too much attention to my children. And so, a word to the wise, would you not say that parents need to pay a lot more attention than maybe some of our parents did to us?
Absolutely. And actually, it's the charming ones. If you read a book called The Sociopath Next Door, you'll see that those kinds of antisocial behavior, or those people with those kinds of issues, actually are quite charming. And so we have to be even extra vigilant about who our children spend time with, particularly the ones that we feel awesome about. So it's really a bummer for parents, because you don't want to be extra vigilant and freaked out all the time and scare your child, but you also have to be wise as serpents in terms of understanding the nature of a predator. And that's why there's this thing going on, I think it's in Texas right now, this sexual abuser, and everyone's rallying behind him, and he's quite popular. He's very awesome person in that sense, and so people are rallying behind him instead of rallying behind the victim, because it's very hard for us to believe that someone super cool and fun could be a predator.
When we come back, we'll talk about your letter to a man in prison, but also I want to get some advice from both of you about those who are caregivers or leaders, pastors and counselors and others. If someone comes to you and says they have been abused, take it seriously. But we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. But let's also open up the phones. Perhaps some of you would like to share your story or ask a question. 1-800-351-1212. We're privileged to have today with us Karen Swallow-Prior and Mary DeMuth. We'll take some of your phone calls and continue our conversation with them right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today about childhood sexual abuse and sexual predators. And if you'd like to join our conversation, most of the lines are filling up. 1-800-351-1212. I think we have one line left, so that shows you the response to this issue. And if you'd like some more information, let me mention that, first of all, in our articles section, we have this very good article written by Karen Swallow Pryor, How Old Were You? Hashtag How Old Were You? So you can read it in its context. Then we also have the book by Mary DeMuth, Not Marked, and also links to both of their websites. And then also, Mary, we've put up the video that is available, the Mary DeMuth story, which is about 2.5 minutes long. Encourage people to watch it. Click the share button, put it on your Facebook page. You will be surprised at the response. And of course, those of you that want to respond to the hashtag, How Old Were You? We have information about that all on our website as well. Just before we take some phone calls, Karen, let me come back to you, because one of the things you mention in your article is that one expert estimates that between 1% and 5% of the population molest children. Okay, let's take the low number, although I tend to believe the high number, but let's just take 1%. Let's talk to our pastors for a minute. Let's say you're a pastor and you have 1,000 members in your congregation. If that number is true, that means at least 10 of the people in your church have proclivities in that direction. Now, one would hope that none of them are working in church nursery or working in youth ministry. But the point I'm making is that so many people were shocked at the response of your hashtag, How Old Were You? If some of those were pastors, they need to sort of educate themselves fairly quickly, or they're going to have perhaps a scandal within their own church.
Absolutely. I mean, as Mary mentioned before, you don't want to be hyper-vigilant and paranoid, but we do need to be wise as serpents, and this applies to every area of life. And so, I mean, we don't leave our purses and our cars unlocked, and we don't leave our doors unlocked, but yet we take certain precautions just out of common sense. But when it comes to matters of a sexual nature, for some reason we just want to not think about it. We just need to be vigilant and sort of assume, without necessarily suspecting a particular person, but just act as though this could happen at any time and take all the safeguards necessary for ourselves and for children and for our congregations to build in as many precautions and preventative measures as possible. And I'm sure Mary can speak to this even more knowledgeably than I can.
Sure. Mary, let me come to you, because you and your husband were church planters in France. Of course, now you're involved in churches and ministry here. It seems to me that some pastors get it, but a lot of them probably need to be educated, don't you think?
I do, and I was kind of casually chatting with Boz, who writes about this quite a bit in his own blog, and he has talked about the fact that we do need a conference. We need some education. We need to really speak to those in ministry to have good vision and ability to discern what these kinds of folks are, particularly doing great background checks, which I know churches do a pretty good job of. Most churches do. But to really discern what those background checks share. So, yes, I think it's absolutely important. And one of the things my husband said is he went to Dallas Seminary, and he said there was never any preparation for that kind of thing. There's no preparation for how to counsel someone who's been abused. What if someone in your congregation is an abuser? What are the rules, and what kind of obligation does a church have? How do you prevent this from happening? What happens if one of your leaders does it? I mean, these are huge questions, and they need to be addressed.
Well, again, MaryDeMuth.com is her website. We have a link there. And of course, you can get her book there. Of course, we also have it in our Point of View store. We just think it's a very important way to educate you about these issues. And let me take a phone call, too, and then I want to come back to a couple other issues we want to talk about with our guests. But can somebody click on line 3? For some reason, I do not have the ability. There it is. Cindy, South Carolina,
Yeah.
WGNN. I appreciate you calling today.
Thank you. It's just touched home with us really big, and I haven't heard anybody discuss it out in the public. Our granddaughter was a sophomore at her high school, and the coach found out she had a crush on him, and he started texting her, and then he got her a private app. And the detective said he got in her head for a year. He talked to her. He told her what to wear, what boys not to talk to. He was acting like a teenager. And when she turned 16, he knew the laws for the state. And that's when he took it to a sexual nature. And she had told a friend, and the friend told her mother. And that's how it came to light. But the community is a lot of them stand by him. The kids at school, she was taken out, and her parents wanted to homeschool her, and she said, "No, I'm going back." And she's been called names. She's a good girl. And it's just been terrible to see how the adults act. They're standing by him. They say terrible things on the internet. She's had to go into counseling because he did lose his job. He was allowed to resign, but he hasn't. He's working in the community in another area, not with kids, but she's had to go out of our town in order to even get an attorney to look at her case.
Okay.
And it's because she's 16, they say.
Yeah, and let me just give, I want to give our callers a chance to make their case, but also want to hear from our guest. Karen, your comments, Mary, either of you jump in, because here is a good example of where the victim has been further victimized.
Yes, and it's just wrong and unfair. And I think we need to have a dialogue, a national dialogue about this, so that we can begin to understand what this is secondary abuse to the victim. And it makes it, a lot of people who've talked to me about their sexual abuse have said it was even harder to get over the secondary abuse of either a parent not believing them or other people believing other people. It is very, very painful and very hard to get over.
Karen?
Well, and when we're dealing with teenagers, as someone who works with older teenagers, I mean, I think people tend to distinguish, and there is some distinction between little children and older teenagers, but I work with teenagers. Teenagers look like adults physically, but they are still very immature and very much children. And the sexualizing of teenagers that we see in our media makes us think that they are more responsible and more grown up than they are, but they really aren't. They are children, and we need to think of them that way as well.
I wanted to use Cindy's call, Mary, to set up the letter that you sent to what you call Dear Man in Prison, because, as you've pointed out, sometimes we sort of rally around the perpetrator and actually further victimize the victim. And I would, again, encourage people to read that letter that you wrote, but you just wanted to try to get to his heart and recognize what he had actually done.
Yeah, I wrote it so that, in fact, I put a picture of myself at the age I was when I was molested at 5, and I said, I want you to look at this picture. And part of the reasoning was that I don't think, especially in his article, he really did not understand what he had done to another human being. He was only concerned about the consequences of his actions that landed him in prison, and was kind of warning other youth pastors not to do what he did, but more like he was sad that he got caught, not sad that he did this. And my letter was to help him to realize this changes somebody's life forever. And my personal opinion is that one of Satan's greatest tools against humanity is sexual abuse, because it warps your identity, it warps how you think about yourself. It warps your view of God, particularly if it took place in church or church leaders did not protect you, or even feeling that God did not protect you. These are all huge issues, and his participation is just furthering the problem.
And you pointed out just a minute ago, sometimes they rally around the perpetrator, especially because they tend to be charming individuals. And some of the serial rapists, killers, and others tend to have these sort of charming personalities. So there's a natural reaction of, oh, that can't be true. And that, of course, like you said, is the further victimization, which you faced in your situation and others have as well, that when you tell your parents, you tell a pastor, their reaction is, no, that can't be. You're making all of this up. And then we make a situation even worse and drive them into silence for many, many years.
Exactly, and I think that's why we have a culture of silence, because most victims have been told to be silent under threat.
Yes.
And so whether that threat is overt or don't say anything or you'll hurt the family reputation, whatever, it's very strong. And I think by nature we want to protect those people for some reason, and we don't speak. So that's why myself and Karen and others are aiming to just say it out loud and help others be set free so they can say it out loud.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll take a few more phone calls. We'll do our best to try to get to as many as possible, and we will give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to contact either or both of these women, we do have links to their websites. We have some articles, a video, so you can educate yourself and others. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes today, Karen Swallow Pryor and Mary DeMuth. Just to maybe speed some of this up, some of the questions I could tell off air, Mary, were about what constitutes any kind of sexual abuse. It brings us back to the Dan Allender quote you gave just a minute ago. One of the callers wanted to know, well, I've got this one man, he swats every woman on the back of their rear end, and is that sexual abuse? Your thoughts?
Well, it certainly isn't great. It's a form of sexual abuse, yes. And it really kind of depends on your response to it and the person's intent. But yes, of course, that's sexual abuse. It depends also on the severity of it and how long that's been going on. If it leads to other things, factors like that.
Let's go to another phone call here, and this is a caller named Karen in Illinois. Karen, you're on with Karen and Mary.
Hi. I just want to point out that, too, they have things out there in the world that help kids to learn how to say no. And my sensei strongly teaches it, is how to avoid abuse by how to say no if a stranger does come up to you and you wouldn't know if they were one. And that's if kids get into martial arts these days. And they take them as young as 5, and places do, and they teach them how to protect themselves against that and how to say no.
Okay. I think that, first of all, learning to say no. It's funny how, I'll come to you first, Karen. We tell our kids to say no to drugs, and we tell them to never go with a stranger, but still, I think there is some education that needs to take place by parents that there are just certain parts of your body you cannot allow anybody to touch, except maybe a doctor when the parent is there. I mean, there's just some basic education. And because, as you said, we don't like to talk about the sexual issues, we just perpetuate the problem, do we not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have in the church a big problem talking about sexual abuse because we have a big problem talking about sex. And so we have to just start there. This sex is God's gift to us. It belongs to us. We should be good stewards of it. And I think by starting out by being able to talk more positively about the gift of sexuality, I think it would be much easier for us to talk about the abuse of that gift.
Let's see if we can go to Sandra in California, listening on KNLB. You're obviously, Sandra, going to be talking to an English professor, and I think your illustration is a good one. Go for it.
Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a novel. It's called The Scarlet Letter, and where a minister had done something that was not proper, and the victim, of course, in the and this has been going on for a long time. Now, we have Lady Chanticleer's Lover, which is the opposite, a female onto a young person in the 1950s. It was published by Doubleday. My mother was into these book clubs, and it come flying into our house, and I was so repulsed that hazing in the colleges, the raping going on there, the suicides, the various things have been covered up for so long, too long, and people have seared, their whole conscience is just seared because of our media and the rapport people take about sex now. It's like it's all right to have affairs, it's all right to shack up, it's all right to do all of these things, and oh, so what? He made a few comments or did a few things. And I'd like to hear your comment on that, please.
Well, the other part I thought we might put on the table there, Karen, is you think about Hester Prynne. She was victimized as well. Of course, later on, the pastor Arthur Dimsdale is maybe found out. But the bottom line is it's another good example of where we further victimize the victim in some cases. And that may have been consensual, but nevertheless, I think it brings that other point that we brought up just a few minutes ago.
Sure. I mean, because there's an aspect of sexual abuse that has to do with abuse of authority and power, which applies to adults as well, and that's what we had going on in the Scarlet Letter. And certainly a number of these things have been going on for a long time, and it's hard to tell sometimes if there really is an increase or if it's just an increase in reporting. But either way, it's still something that we need to talk about. And yes. I do sense that probably the sexual abuse of children is something that, because of pornography and a lot of other things, probably is on the rise. I don't know if Mary knows more about that. But
I make the case. Especially when we've talked about Pure Hope and everything. Let me, if I can, just get to one more call, because I think Mary can perhaps help there. And we want to go to someone who would like to remain anonymous. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
How you doing?
Yes, what would you like to share with us?
Well, basically, I was molested by a man and a woman, and actually at a very young age, and it was actually personal. And I was just wondering, how do you get over something like that? Because I've had, like, personal conversations with, a mate or a friend, and I have a deep passion about the thing that's going on with the gay marriage and stuff like that. Because for me, like, I'm confused on how you get over it. Especially when it happened so young. Maybe you didn't understand what was going on at the time, and then it's just I don't know how does a person get over something like that after they've been through it. How do they remove themselves? Because I'm not confused about it. You see what I mean? Like, I'm not gay, and I know I'm not gay, even though it happened. I've had a successful life then, but how do they move on or go from there?
Yeah, let's go to Mary. Mary, can you maybe help? Obviously, most of the individuals you've been interacting with are women, but men have been abused as well, and I'm sure he's asking a very fundamental question. How do you get over this?
Yeah, in fact, when we had our marriage seminar about this, there was a very strong amount of men that went through it as well. So I actually have men and women coming to me with this exact same question, which is why I wrote Not Marked. If you go to notmarked.com, at the very top, there's a quiz you can take about sexual abuse impact. It's called the Sexual Abuse Impact Quiz. And that kind of helps you to see how sexual abuse has affected you today. And then the book is really about my journey of healing. It's answering that exact question of how do you get over it. But the other part that I think is helpful is that my husband wrote part as the spouse of a victim of how the spouse can help the other spouse, whether it's female or male, to also get through this very difficult thing, because it is something you have to work through when you're married, definitely, because marriage involves sex. So obviously it's an issue. So that's why I wrote the book, and I think it might be of help to some of the listeners out there.
I might also mention they can watch the video there where both Patrick and you are teaching, so that is a great way to find some of those resources. Again, notmarked.com, of course, marydemuth.com, and there's some just great resources that we wanted to try to make available as well on our website, pointofview.net. Well, first of all, let me come back to you, Karen. I so appreciate the fact that you were willing to join us today, and I so appreciate the fact that you started that hashtag, How Old Were You? And I'm hoping that not only the Twitter feeds and those conversations that happened on many blogs, but maybe this radio program today reminded us of the fact that we have a number of people in church leadership that aren't thinking about this issue, aren't aware of this issue, or don't think it's important. And I really want to thank you for the contribution you've made of educating people today, even on Point of View.
You're welcome, and thank you for continuing this important conversation.
Mary, I'm sure we're going to do this again because you live in the area and we are certainly good friends. And Mary, thank you for all that you've poured into this issue. You've, over the many years, helped individuals learn how to be better writers, certainly helped parents be better parents, but I certainly appreciate this ministry that you've had of reaching out and helping provide healing to individuals. And just as our last caller asked, how do I get over this? There is healing and help and, most importantly, hope for those individuals that want to get over this. And I want to thank you so very much also for joining us so often here on Point of View.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for giving us a platform for this.
Hope that you've appreciated this. It has been a difficult topic, but we do want you to know more about this. If you would like to listen to this again, you can go to the podcast. If you know somebody that maybe needs to hear this, you can click on that podcast and hit the share button and send it to them. Or, of course, I've also mentioned that we have information about this hashtag, How Old Were You?, as well as information about Mary DeMuth's latest book, Not Marked, as well as some of her earlier ones like Thin Places and her video. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. And if you value this conversation, I hope that you might consider supporting us, because we believe that it is something that more people need to hear about. We're going to take a break and come back with more right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Privilege to bring back to the microphone Edward Klein. He's been on the program with us many times before as we've talked about some of his New York Times best-selling books, The Amateur. Most recently, we talked with him about The Truth About Hillary and the new book, Blood Feud, The Clintons and the Obamas. If you are not familiar with him, he's been on the program many times before. You've probably seen him on all sorts of different interview shows. Former editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine, former foreign editor for Newsweek, has always been able to have access to lots of people that are close to Barack Obama, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and as a result gives us the inside story. So, Edward Klein, thank you for joining us again here on Point of View.
Well, it's great to be back with you, Kerby, and with your audience, and I love your faith, family, and freedom. I think that sums up what America's all about.
Well, I appreciate that as well. You know, we're going to talk about all sorts of things. We only have about half an hour with you in the book. But one of the ones when you're reading a book, you're telling other people about the insights. One of the one that gets everybody's mind going is when I say, well, do you know that Michelle Obama is really thinking about running for political office, maybe senator from Illinois or something like that. People may know a little bit about the feud between the Clintons and the Obamas. They may know a little bit that Valerie Jarrett is kind of the power behind the scenes. This always catches everybody off guard, and I don't think most people would know anything about the political ambitions of Michelle Obama if they hadn't read your book.
Well, I think you're right, and it's certainly one of the revelations in the book, Blood Feud. Michelle Obama has been urged by both her husband, the president, and by her best friend and most important political advisor, Valerie Jarrett,
right,
to consider a political future. And the most obvious thing for her to do would be to run for senator from her home state of Illinois, where Mark Kirk is up for re-election in 2016. Mm-hmm. She's talked about it. She's checked with Rahm Emanuel, the mayor, Democratic mayor of Chicago, about it. I'm not sure she's going to do it, but she certainly has given it very serious thought.
Well, and it also sets me up for an interesting confrontation, if you will, between Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, the 41st president and the 43rd president, because at one point, Bill Clinton, as he's wont to do, when he starts talking, he really starts talking. He's talking about all the reasons why Hillary Clinton would be a great next president, served as Secretary of State and been in the White House and your background and on and on. And he's going on and on and on and on and on about this. And so at one point, then Barack Obama then chimes in that Michelle Obama is thinking about running for office. And apparently, according to your book, Bill Clinton was ready to walk off the golf course at that point. And I think it shows a little bit of the conflict between these two individuals.
It's hard to make Bill Clinton speechless, as you can imagine.
There's a great line. Best one of the day.
But Kerby, I think in this instance, according to Clinton, who came back after this golf game with Obama, and told his wife and some friends about the conversation, he said, I was talking to the president, meaning Barack Obama, of course, and said that Hillary would make a great president in the future. And Hillary, of course, beamed when she heard Bill recount this conversation. And then Bill went on to say, but you can't imagine what Barack Obama said to me. He said, well, I think that Michelle would make a good president, too. And Bill said, I was ready to just walk off the golf course. I couldn't believe he put Michelle Obama in the same category as you, Hillary.
I can't either. But I think it illustrates the feud. And in this book, you have a picture after Bill Clinton gave a very wonderful and very gracious introduction at the re-election campaign and during the 2012 Democratic National Convention, where both Barack Obama and Bill Clinton are hugging each other. But the backstory that you talk about here is that there was a conclusion early on as they were getting close to the re-election campaign of 2012 that they were going to have to do something to eliminate the Republican nominee. And at that point, they didn't necessarily know it was Mitt Romney, but they felt that they were going to need a huge number of attack ads, but they needed somebody that had credibility to launch that attack. Mm-hmm. And so then, as you describe in the book, there is a meeting where they, with fear and trepidation, suggest that that person to Barack Obama that would actually be that champion is Bill Clinton. And everybody at that point had real interest in looking at their shoes because they did not want to see the next reaction. But fill in the details, because it again illustrates that sometimes when it's politically expedient, these two families get together, but most of the time there's a tremendous amount of animus on both sides.
Well, that's so true. I mean, they can hardly stand to be in the same room with each other, but the meeting that you're talking about took place in the White House.
Right.
In, I believe, the Roosevelt Room, if I'm not mistaken. And this was at a point when Barack Obama, in August 2011, was at one of the lowest points in the polls in his presidency. And they really, his political advisors really thought he might lose the re-election campaign. That's when the idea of reaching out to Bill Clinton came up, and Valerie Jarrett, who is, as you know, the chief, I was going to say bottle washer, but that's not exactly the word I want, the chief advisor to the president and to Michelle, she objected vehemently to bringing the Clintons into the re-election campaign. And when she was overruled, she later said to the president, I think this gives you a real flavor for what's going on in this blood feud. She said to him, okay, reach out to Bill Clinton, promise him anything to get him to help you in the campaign. But once you're reelected, you're not going to owe him anything, and you don't have to come through with the promise.
Wow.
And that's exactly what happened.
That is amazing. Just before we take a break, maybe let's answer the question that sometimes people have when you've been on, and that's, how do you know this? I mean, and the bottom line is you don't have a chance to actually interview the four participants here, Bill and Hillary Clinton and Barack and Michelle Obama, but you have been given fairly significant access to people that are close to both the Clintons and the Obamas. And because of that, and because sometimes they're willing to speak off the record, they will tell you things that actually give us an inside look of what is happening within the White House.
That's so true. And, you know, I've been a journalist for almost 50 years, and I've been doing what I'm doing for all this time and have a Rolodex of sources as long as your arm. And these people and I have been together, these sources and I, for so many books and so many articles. I've gained their trust. They are in the inner circles of the Obamas and the Clintons. They're not just former officials who go to cocktail parties in Washington. These are real people who are in the know because they're very close to the Obamas and the Clintons.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, and we come back. One of the things I want to spend some time on is also you have given us much better documentation for the health issues surrounding who many people think could be the next president, and that is Hillary Clinton. And so we'll talk about that. We've also, of course, mentioned Valerie Jarrett and certainly some of her power. And so we'll get some inside look. And if you would like to join us a little bit later, we'll certainly give you that chance as well. Edward Klein with us as we talk about his book, Blood Feud. It is published by Regnery. Look for it in your local bookstore. We'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the Supreme Court ruling in the Hobby Lobby case continues to be controversial to some, as evidenced by the attempt in the U.S. Senate to overturn the ruling through legislation. Critics say that your employer should not determine which birth control you use, and supporters say that employers shouldn't have to pay for birth control that violates their religious convictions. I would essentially agree with both statements and argue that is why we should get government and employers out of medical decisions you should be able to make without their interference. Dr. Ben Carson makes that point in a recent column talking about health savings accounts. He also acknowledges that people have legitimate differences of opinion about the appropriateness of various forms of birth control. He also agrees that we shouldn't force people or businesses to fund controversial forms of birth control if they have moral objections. He therefore asks, wouldn't it be fairer and make more sense for people wanting some form of birth control to pay for it themselves? Health savings accounts can be funded in a number of ways. This would give each of us total control of our health care dollars. We can determine how we want to spend our money on which drugs and medical procedures. Dr. Carson also explains that family members could also shift money in their account to another family member who may need a particular test or procedure. Dr. Carson laments the complex rules of Obamacare that severely restrict the use and application of health savings accounts. This is indeed unfortunate because these accounts would answer the two complaints I mentioned earlier. You, and not your employer, should determine which birth control you would use, and employers would not have to pay for birth control that violates their religious convictions. Health savings accounts would be simple, effective, and allow for greater patient freedom without violating their religious freedom. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Edward Klein with us for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Probably get to those calls after he leaves us, but we'll certainly give you a chance to comment about some of these issues. The book, Blood Feud, The Clintons and the Obamas, it's published by Regnery, another New York Times bestseller, no doubt, and we also encourage you to look for it in your local bookstore, but if not, we also have it in our Point of View store. Also have an article on Blood Feud, 10 Revelations, and might point you to a piece that Ed put out last week through the various columns, How Our World Fell Apart. And that kind of brings us to Hillary Clinton, and that is she has been Secretary of the State. But in the book, and also in your most recent article, you talk about the fact that she is quite clear in pointing out that the world is falling apart because there's no hand on the tiller. I'm leaving out all the swear words she uses, but you know what I'm getting at here. By the way, I mean, every time I've read any book, not just yours, but others in the past, this woman does have a mouth, but we'll leave that to another day. And certainly that was the argument, that there's no hand on the tiller. And more importantly, you have a very strong piece there where Bill Clinton was telling Hillary Clinton, don't you dare take these stupid talking points from the White House and go on the Talking Head show. So instead, the one that went out there and got her head handed to her was Susan Rice. So there's a lot of tension even within the Clinton family about how obedient or faithful or loyal Hillary Clinton should have been to the Obama administration.
That's true, Kerby. And what's so interesting is Hillary Clinton, we have to first say, is running for president, even though she hasn't announced.
Yes.
I can say that flatly because I've talked to her friends and her associates and people who have access to her in private conversations, and there's no question she's running. Her problem is, of course, among many problems, that she was the Secretary of State during the first 4 years of the Obama administration. And she was, as you might call it, present at the creation of Obama's so-called foreign policy. That includes our bombing of Libya,
yes,
which has turned Libya into a militia Islamic state, our reset with Russia, which Hillary, led and has led to the takeover by Putin of Crimea and his assault on Ukraine, Benghazi and the loss of 4 American lives, and we can go on and on. So how does she run for president? By calling attention to her credentials as Secretary of State when she has no accomplishments to point to. It's going to be a very interesting dance that she performs in order to get elected president.
Well, and the other way she could do it is to blame the other people that are actually overriding her, quote. Not that they did, but I'm just saying she could say that David Axelrod, Valerie Jarrett, John Brennan, and others were really running the foreign policy out of the White House, and she did what she could, but also to distance herself from Benghazi, to distance herself, as you said, from the Russian reset, and most importantly now, just depend upon people's short memories to realize that maybe they forget that she was present, as you said, at the creation of the foreign policy.
Well, I totally agree with every word you've just said, and I think that's exactly what the Clinton strategy is, to distance herself from Obama, and I think we're already seeing signs of that. Bill Clinton, who, of course, you always get 2 for the price of 1 with the Clintons, has...
And she even said she was afraid that if she became president, he would just think that he was president again. So that was interesting.
I wonder why she thinks that. Bill Clinton is an irrepressible force, and she knows it better than anybody.
Well, yeah, but he's also going to his penthouse there in Little Rock, and from what I understand, he's dating again. So, I don't know that he's... I'm sorry, but just had to get that one in.
Okay.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that certainly that is a challenge for her. And the other one that I wanted to put on the table, which was very significant, is some of us have heard a little bit about the health issues of Hillary Clinton. Your book goes into it in ways that I think most of us did not understand until we picked up a copy of Blood Feud.
Right. Actually, when I wrote Blood Feud, I expected the Clintons to come out and lie and say, well, that's not true. They have not refuted what's in Blood Feud, and that is that Hillary's doctor and her team of doctors has told her that she has a heart valve problem, that they even considered doing heart valve replacement surgery, decided for the moment not to do it, but that she needed to be monitored for the rest of her life very carefully. I do not go on to say in this book that disqualifies her as presidential material, because I'm not a physician. I'm not in a position to say that. But what I do say, and I think you'd agree with me, and I think your listeners would too, is that we are due a full accounting of her medical records. Because if she gets into the White House and then her health fails, but she's still the president, you know who's going to be calling the shots, and that's not the vice president. That'll be Bill Clinton.
Yeah. And there has been a question, of course, about his health as well. Of course, we never really got all his records, but you point out in the book that Chelsea is kind of stepping in to help at the Clinton Global Initiative. And you even talk about the fact that maybe she's positioned to take over the foundation when Bill can no longer run it day to day. So you're really kind of setting up for maybe a Clinton dynasty. Is that fair?
I think it's very fair, and I think Chelsea Clinton is one of the great untold stories of our time, actually, because she has essentially taken over the Clinton Foundation while her father, Bill Clinton, is helping run Hillary's campaign for president. And Chelsea is also very involved in her mother's political campaign. She's a force to be reckoned with, and I think she's going to be a major player in Democratic politics for many years to come.
So I did mention the fact that sometimes when Bill Clinton is looking for some peace and quiet, he goes back to the presidential library. There's a penthouse there, which, again, I did not know till I read your book. And so oftentimes that's a place where he just goes to sort of hang out. And I suspect that if indeed you have a Clinton campaign Some may be run from New York, some might be run from Washington, but I suspect some might even be run from Little Rock, Arkansas. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, he loves to go back to Little Rock. He's to not use a play on words, but he's a rock star there. He has this very luxurious penthouse apartment where he throws parties and invites people from all over the United States to come. You see private jets lined up at the Little Rock airport all the time because they're visiting Bill in his penthouse. And one little aside, when women, and I'm not suggesting anything sexual here, but when female important people come to visit him in his penthouse, he has a garden outside of the penthouse, and he plucks yellow roses and gives each of the women a yellow rose as a token of remembrance for their visit.
That's incredible. Any maybe real surprises to you? I've pulled out the ones that were sort of surprising to me, but just before we let you go, I thought I'd kind of ask an open-ended question, because sometimes you find some great insights. But as an individual that has been interviewing for the last year or so the individuals associated with either the Obama family or the Clinton family, anything else that you found that was kind of unique or surprising that you did not know?
Well, I think your listeners would be very interested to know that Vernon Jordan, a eminent African-American leader in the Democratic Party who's been a presidential advisor and wise man for many, many years. Oh, sure. I interviewed him on the record, and he said something very interesting that surprised me, because he's a Democrat.
Right.
He said, yes, the Republicans may be giving the President Obama a hard time. That's what opposition parties do. But it's up to this president to show leadership. And he then trailed off and didn't say what he implied, which is that there has been a lack of leadership.
Yeah. And you have a picture of him with Barack Obama and then also former Mayor Michael Bloomberg. But I love what he said there, that after 4 hours of golf with the president, he didn't ask me, I'll leave out the swear word, anything. And I thought that was intriguing, too. That's something we've heard more about this president. Instead of calling up Bush, Clinton, Vernon Jordan, whoever it might be, to say, you know, do you have advice? Doesn't seem to be seeking any of that.
Even John F. Kennedy, if you recall, when he needed advice on military affairs, he called up his predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower, and the other presidents have done exactly the same. This president, Barack Obama, is different. He doesn't think he needs advice from anybody. And, of course, I would argue that he's in dire need of good advice.
Well, Edward Klein, we always appreciate having you on the program, and Blood Feud is just full of all sorts of revelations. We've written some of them up, and so if people would like to get a little bit of a sense of what they'll find when they open up the book, we have those on our website. But again, almost 300 pages of great information. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kerby. It's great to be with you.
We will do it again. Let's take a break, and when we come back, let's open up the phones. Perhaps some of the things we've said already resonate with you. If not, I've got quite a number of things that have happened over the last 24 hours that we certainly want to talk about. And if you would like to join the conversation today, let's open up the phones. Last half hour, open line, 1-800-351-1212. You can even pick out something we talked about in the first hour when we talked about sexual abuse, if that you were not able to get through and would like to share your story or ask a question or make a comment. We will give you that, but at the same time, when I come back, I want to get into a couple of issues. We've learned a little bit more about the IRS scandal. As a matter of fact, now a lot of smoking guns, and we'll talk about that and get into those issues. But if you'd like to join us on maybe some of the observations we've made about Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and others, we will welcome your phone calls. We'll be back right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Ed Klein with us as we talked about his book, Blood Feud. And I'd love to get your comments about who you think will be the nominees. And certainly it's early in the game, but many people believe that the Democratic nominee will be Hillary Clinton. Interestingly enough, one of the callers wasn't able to stay on the line, was saying, well, what about a battle between Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama? I mean, after all, it was Barack Obama who actually seriously suggested to the former president, Bill Clinton, that Michelle Obama would make a good president. I, first of all, don't think that would happen. I think the more likely possibility is that Michelle Obama might run for Senate in Illinois, thinking that at least you have to have some kind of senatorial credential before you run for the presidency. But we'll see. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I thought one of the things that would be maybe helpful is when I was talking about that interaction, the reason I think Barack Obama said that is because Bill Clinton had this way, maybe unintentionally, of making Barack Obama feel small, because as he was, and they're on the golf course, talking about how Hillary Clinton would bring such expertise. Matter of fact, at one point, apparently he said, bring more expertise than any president we've ever had. And he's, of course, talking to the president. I think Barack Obama took that as a slight, meaning, well, wait a minute. You're saying that your wife would have more expertise than I had when I became president of the United States. That's when I think he threw in this idea of Michelle Obama. But it's more than just that one statement. There is a whole chapter here that really talks about this idea of Michelle Obama running. So I don't think that Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama would be running against each other, but I'd love to get your thoughts. Many people believe that she's the odd-on favorite. And I come back to Rick Santorum, former senator from Pennsylvania. He said something a while back that made a lot of sense to me. And he says, you know, when we look at Democratic nominees, they tend to actually pick people that are younger and more enthusiastic and have more energy. If indeed some of the concerns about Hillary Clinton's health, not to mention her age, begin to surface, that is something else that certainly we might want to pay attention to as well. And, of course, she has to deal, at least in part, with her tenure there in the Obama administration as Secretary of State. And in the book, Ed Klein talks about Hillary, really commented to a number of people, history will only judge whether it was a good idea for me to have actually run as Secretary of State and been in the Obama administration. And she then goes on to say, those will be people, some who are very young, others not even born yet, who will be writing about my presidency. So I thought it was kind of intriguing. But in his piece, Ed Klein points out, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that she was present at the creation of the Clinton foreign policy. And then he goes on to talk about what you've had as the unraveling of order that has happened because, first of all, the lack of leadership from the president. And she uses some pretty quaint words about how there's no hand on the tiller. And believe me, I'm cleaning up some of the language significantly. But then, you know, look at where we are right now. As one individual said, you know, whether it's the issue of the reset of Russia, whether it's the battle for women and religious minorities, whether it's the Israeli-Palestinian peace, whether it's the halting of Iran's nuclear weapons, you can go on and on and on, a long list. Certainly, some were arguing that if you're talking about a batting average, he was 0 for, and you fill in the number, 5, 10, 15. And that's significant. So anyway, those are some issues on the table. And if you'd like to address that, in just a minute, I'm going to address a couple of other issues. We will certainly take your phone calls. Let's go to Eric in Missouri, KNEO. What would you like to share with us today?
Well, there's so much, Kurt. When it comes to whether or not that our president takes advice from anyone, I would disagree with Mr. Klein because, according to Dinesh D'Souza, he does take advice from Valerie Jarrett. Some say that she's really runs the country, runs the White House.
And he says that in the book. Maybe we didn't communicate that well, but he really does say that she is the power behind Barack Obama. But go ahead.
Oh, well, okay, then. And to me, you know, that's a kind of a scary thing. But it's never talked about, Kerby. by the news media. Not to any degree, but I think he does take advice from. I'm certain now that's where he gets his advice. But I think he also takes it, as opposed to presidents in the past who took it. For example, John F. Kennedy taking advice from Dwight Eisenhower. Our president doesn't take advice from former presidents or reliable governmental leaders, but from her and from other Marxists. Now, as far as Hillary goes, what a smorgasbord to talk about, Kerby. You've got
to put a lot on the table.
You've got futures trading. You've got the fact that her confidant is in a high position within the Muslim Brotherhood, and on and on and on it goes. The question is this: will the American people be informed, or will, just like with our president now, who was not properly vetted because of a compliant news media, would the same thing happen with her? What do you think, Kerby?
Well, let's hope that a lot more of information is out there than was with Barack Obama. I don't know of anybody that has worked more steadfastly to try to protect his image. And even these last couple of days, there's been this new article coming out by the Weekly Standard about something that Barack Obama wrote back in 1983. And, people are finding these now, 5-6 years later, of statements he's made about foreign policy. So that's a little different than, of course, a individual that was in the White House for 8 years, then was a senator from New York, and then Secretary of State. But we will see. American people sometimes just simply overlook all the concerns they might have because they wanted to elect, first black president, now maybe first woman president. I hope not, but I'm sorry if I miscommunicated that, because if anything, that's one of the things that comes out of Ed Klein's book. Valerie Jarrett is the power behind the organization. She was the one that urged the president to go to Congress for the authorization to bomb Syria. She and David Axelrod and John Brennan probably pretty much are the three individuals that determine foreign policy out of the White House. I don't think we've ever known anybody who has not been a part of the family who has exerted such influence on the president. You could talk about Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy, but that was in the family, or even the influence that Rosalind Carter maybe had on Jimmy Carter. But we've never had somebody outside who has really been able to call all the shots, spends all the time with the family, and is almost like a family member, but nevertheless has a very powerful position and pretty much determines what this president's going to say and what he's going to do.
What do we know about her?
Not a whole lot, other than having some of the same kind of community organizing background. And so maybe we could do a program just on Valerie Jarrett in case people are really curious about that. But I think we already know enough about this president. But I think your point's well taken. We didn't really get a lot of people taking seriously the fact that Bill Ayers, a former terrorist, was a close friend of Barack Obama. He said, I just met him once or twice. Now, it's pretty good evidence now he ghost wrote one of the books, and his father was the one that actually sent him through school. So, of course, he was not well vetted. We know a lot more about the Clinton administration. We know a lot more about Hillary Clinton. And, again, the question, I think, and it's a very good question, Eric, is whether or not the American people are going to care.
We can only pray the Lord will open up eyes and hearts.
Well, I appreciate you joining our conversation today.
Thank you very much, Kerby. God bless you.
And if you'd like to join our conversation, that opens up a line, 1-800-351-1212. And I did want to at least put that on the table a little bit, because it's a little too early to be thinking about the next presidential election. We're in the midst of midterm elections, but since this book came out, there were a lot of revelations, and some of those had to do with the Clintons, some had to do with the Obamas, some had to do with the conflict between the two. But he's done, I think, a very good job of helping us kind of get an inside look. And we don't have to wait in these kind of modern days for a tell-all book to come out after somebody leaves office. We've learned a lot more because of some of the investigative work of people like Edward Klein. Just before we go to a break, let me just mention my commentary today, in case you haven't had a chance to hear it, has to do with health savings accounts. It's really quoting from Dr. Ben Carson. By the way, some people think Dr. Ben Carson should run for the presidency, but I think he did a very good job in a column a while back that I quote from, saying, we do have a lot of people right now that are, because of the ruling that the Supreme Court had on Hobby Lobby, you have on one side critics saying that your employer should not determine which birth control you use. supporters say that employers should not have to pay for birth control that violates their religious convictions. And I think Dr. Ben Carson gives us a good answer to that. And he says, if indeed we have these health savings accounts, then you would be able to answer all of the questions. Because on the one hand, then you would be able to then allow individuals to actually pay for it themselves, so their employers would not be telling them what to do. And on the other hand, you would not be forcing employers to fund things for which they have religious convictions. And so those, I think, are some very good answers to the question. But the problem right now is the Affordable Care Act limits dramatically these health savings accounts. And I think Dr. Ben Carson has pointed out that that really is the best way to empower the poor and to give us the greatest amount of patient choice. Let's take a break. We'll come back with some phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to those in just a minute if we have time. But I did want to put something else on the table, and that is we've been following this IRS scandal for some time, and it has actually come to light that we now see even better evidence of the fact that the applications for many of these 501c3, 501c4 groups was held up because of political reasons. Now, we've sort of known that in the past and certainly have noticed a pattern in which the various Tea Party groups either were slowed down or maybe stopped entirely. But in light of the conflict taking place in the Middle East right now with Israel, I thought I would surface the most recent one, which was reported in the Wall Street Journal. And that is, they say the IRS is stuck by its story that the tax-exempt applications by conservatives got slow-rolled because of bureaucratic bungling, not because the groups opposed President Obama's policies. Now the slow drip of email evidence to congressional investigators is casting further doubt on that tale. They say in 2009, the Pennsylvania group, which is called Z Street, applied for tax-exempt status for its mission of educating people about Israel-related issues. So this one's not a Tea Party group, it's an Israel-related group. But okay, this, I think, actually gives us more information than we might have known. They say in 2010, an IRS agent told Z Street that its application was delayed because the tax agency's Washington, D.C. office was giving special scrutiny to groups whose mission might conflict with the Obama's administration and its policy. The IRS Be on the Lookout list that November also included red flags for groups referring to disputed territories. So now this is very different than the one with Tea Parties. Now it turns out that those that were, let's use the phrase, pro-Israel, were getting slowed down as well. Okay, well, Z Street sued in August 2010 for viewpoint discrimination because one of them kind of let the cat out of the bag. That is, we're not bungling here. We're not slowing this down because we just need to look at it a little bit more. We just don't think that your policy, your view about Israel is the same as Barack Obama's policy, so that's that. So they then brought suit in August of 2010 for viewpoint discrimination, and this case is now headed for what's called discovery in the federal court. And now emails uncovered by the House Ways and Means Committee show that the IRS and the State Department were conferring in 2009 about pro-Israel groups like Z Street and considering arguments to deny their tax-exempt applications. Then we can go through some of the rest of the various points, but you run then into something very interesting because we have an email from the Treasury attaché to the U.S. Consulate in Jerusalem, Catherine Bauer, who sent the IRS and the Treasury colleagues a news report sent to her by the State Department foreign officer, and the subject was whether 501c3 groups buying land in Israel's disputed territories were engaged in possible violations of U.S. tax laws. Okay, we understand that. Thought you might find the article of interest interestingly, and they find this in the email. And although I believe that you said you can't speak to ongoing investigations, I thought it was worth flagging the 1997 investigation mentioned below. And then they go through all sorts of things in the email, and the current cases then begin to show that what they were doing is telling anybody that was pro-Israel that they would have to receive additional scrutiny. And the issue wasn't because they hadn't filed the forms correctly. The issue wasn't because of bureaucratic bungling. It all had to do with, and it comes back to some of these smoking gun emails, to the fact that they actually were pro-Israel and thus had a different policy than the administration. So now you have not only the IRS, but you have the State Department, and some of this is now being uncovered by the House Ways and Means Committee. Stay tuned. There'll be more in the future about that, but let's go back to some phone calls. We'll go to South Carolina first, WAGP. Elsie, thank you for calling today.
Thank you for taking my question. But I was just wondering, how in the world will any election ever make a difference with the media when over half of our population has the handout and is on the government dole, and 40% of the people in our working force work for the government? They'll never vote for anybody that wants smaller government. So how in the world will we ever listen to the hard-working man that is an honest Christian citizen that knows right from wrong? I don't see how any election will ever make a difference.
Well, and I share some of your concern. I wrote a commentary about this a while back in which we point out that if you look at American households, I'm not so sure about some of the numbers you got there, but American households, you can get that number almost up to 52% of American households. Now, that being said, I think you do run into mistake sometimes, because after all, some people that are receiving government benefits are those who paid into those in the first place. In other words, I don't begrudge an individual that has paid into Social Security all their life, and now as they are retiring, they receive Social Security. Certainly an individual that has served in the military, an individual that served in the government, they deserve to be paid. But your point's well taken, and it was illustrated by Senator Phil Gramm, who used to use the phrase, we have too many people in the wagon and too few people pulling the wagon. The only thing I can hope for is the fact that we've had people call into this program many times before and say, look, you know, if it would make a difference in the future of this country that I maybe do not get a cost of living increase in Social Security so that we can be solvent, or others that say, you know, I'm receiving double payments, I'm really sort of double dipping because of my service in government, maybe I could forego one of those. If we could find enough of those people, that's the case. And I recognize that some people receiving benefits still might be willing to limit the size and scope of government. But Elsie, that's exactly my concern. Right now, you have entirely too many people that are dependent upon the government, and thus they are the least likely individuals to want to limit the size and scope of government. And so if we cannot appeal to people's moral concerns, or even forget the moral issue, just the economic concern, can we go down the road much further when we're already $17 trillion in debt? And if we simply have more and more people simply asking what the government can do for them rather than what they can do for the government, taking the John Kennedy phrase and turning it upside down, then I think we're going to run into some real problems. So you've raised a good question. It deserves an entire program, and we will do one of those again in the future. But you might want to go to the blog section there and find some of my facts and figures. Those were created, interestingly enough, by Dr. Merrill Matthews, in which he pointed out just a few weeks ago that now with the additional benefits we're giving out through Medicare and through some of the stimulus programs that will be given theoretically through the Affordable Care Act known as Obamacare, of course that's up in debate right now as we talked about last Friday, we reach a point where we are at a tipping point where we actually, if indeed those numbers are correct, actually have more people receiving benefits from the government than those who are not receiving some benefit from the government. And it's a very good question. So I appreciate you putting it on the table today. I have some others I'd like to put on the table, but that will have to wait till tomorrow. But if you would like to know some more about the topics we've addressed in that first hour, obviously we talked about sexual abuse. We have the book by Mary DeMuth, Not Marked. Of course, you can also go to her website at notmarked.com or to hers, marydemuth.com, to find out a little bit more. If you'd like to know a little bit more about that, hashtag how old were you, hashtag how old were you, that is on the website. We have the video of Mary DeMuth. And in the second hour, we spent about a half an hour talking with our good friend Ed Klein. Edward Klein's book, Blood Feud, you should be able to find it in every bookstore. I think almost every bookstore I've walked in the last few days has had Blood Feud. But if you have any difficulty finding it, it's published by Regnery. You could get it from the publisher. Or most importantly, we have it available right now in our Point of View store, and you can get it there. It is a great read, and it gives you an incredible insight into not only the Clinton family, but also Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, and some of their plans, as well as the feud between them and many other issues we put on the table. Hope you appreciated the conversation we had today, and we hope that you will join us tomorrow, because we are going to get back to a variety of other issues that we will be discussing, and hope that you can join us then. Ray Comfort will be with us in the first hour, Wayne Allen Root, The Murder of the Middle Class, two outstanding programs and two very good guests. We will sit back and hear from them, and if you'd like to join us, you can certainly give us a call there as well. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. 51.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.